This is SHRM Radio in partnership with Timber Media, Podcasters for India Inc.
Hello and welcome to yet another episode of SHRM Radio. You're listening to me, Rakesh Sharma. I hope you're safe, practicing social distancing, washing your hands as often as possible, and not trying to be too adventurous because, there's a lot of adventure to be had on the other side of the pandemic. That is, of course, if we are here for the other side of the pandemic. And for us to be here, we just have to practice a little more patience, follow the rules, and wait it out. But of course, work goes on as usual for most of us. We're sitting at home, working from home, trying to be as best and as productive as we possibly can be. But of course, it has also opened its own can of worms. How do managers keep their teams together? What is an effective replacement for the informal and formal meetings that we used to have in the office once upon a time? That is BC, before Corona. What does office camaraderie and togetherness mean in the times of social distancing? This is, of course, a huge challenge for organizations across the country and the world, but a particular challenge for internal communications. While there, of course, have been innovations galore in the field of internal communications over the past decade and a half, it has now become paramount that teams stay motivated, stay together, stay informed and focused, even as we work from our homes on a much longer basis than we had imagined. Which is precisely why we need to take a look at employee communication, employee engagement, and internal communication at large, and how they have responded to this new particular challenge in specific and in general over the past few years. To help me out and give me a perspective on how internal communications teams have evolved in this particular time and over the course of the past few years, I'm joined by three very special guests today to give you perspectives from three very different types of companies. Neha Kothari, who is the head of internal communications at Infosys, Bijoy Venugopal of the corporate communications team at Flipkart, and Chaitanya Gowande of BPCL, that is Bharat Petroleum, will be joining me today to give us their perspectives on how internal communications have changed and what is the one thing they all have in common. So in the run-up to the SHRM Edge conference happening on the 29th and 30th of July, we will be talking about how technology has changed the way internal communications are conducted in companies across the country and the world, with specific focus on how internal radio and internal podcasting has made a difference in the way things are conducted these days. So on SHRM Radio, the podcast, we will be talking about all things podcast. Welcome to SHRM Radio.
You are listening to SHRM Radio in partnership with Timber Media, Podcasters for India Inc.
Let's start things off with employee communication itself. As we all know, it is critical to the success of a business. It is the glue that holds your business together. But a lot of businesses don't really have a long-term plan for their IC strategies. One recent survey went on to show that 60% of companies did not have a long-term plan for their internal communications, which is shocking considering employee communication plays an extraordinarily critical role, especially in times of change and crisis. And God knows, we are in the middle of the biggest crisis employment as a concept has known, at least in the 20th and 21st centuries. If employee communication is not handled well enough during a crisis, the company would have to deal with several issues, not least of them including trust in the brand, decreasing, productivity starting to slow down, employees getting confused or worried about their future within the company, and of course, as a result of the lack of information, there could be huge misinformation outside the company as well. And attrition rates could increase simply because employees start feeling unsure about what their future in the company was going to be. So all in all, employee communications, internal communications play an extraordinarily important role. There are, of course, several surveys to show that communication in the workplace may not be as adequate as we would want them to be. According to Gallup, 74% of employees feel that they're missing out on company information and news. Another piece of research went on to show that only 4 in 10 employees, that's about 40%, can confidently describe to others what their employer does. That is a failure of communication. According to another survey conducted by Prescient Digital Media, only 13% of employees report using their intranets on a daily basis, and a 31%, a huge 31%, almost a third, admitted they had never used it. Aon Hewitt, in a 2017 survey, went on to show that just 24% of global employees are highly engaged. And according to Gatehouse in 2016, just 40% of internal comms professionals believe that employees understood well or very well the contribution that IC professionals were making to the organization's strategy. And take a look at what they have to say about emails. McKinsey Global Institute found that an average employee spends 13 hours a week reading and responding to email, which is by far the most time-consuming work activity at 28% of the work time. What's something else that communications teams might have to bear in mind? According to one SaneBox internal data, the average inbox contains only 38% important or relevant emails, which means 62% of the emails in the average inbox are not important and can be processed in bulk. The long and short of these pieces of research is that communications, as was done in the past, is just not working, and there needs to be a new way to look at them. Some people that I'll be speaking to, as I've said earlier, will be shedding some light on it, but let's also take a look at what the importance of internal communications is and where the message is getting lost.
This is SHRM Radio in partnership with Timber Media, Podcasters for India Inc.
Communication, of course, is a hugely important thing in general. But at times like this, when we are all siloed in our own little homes and we need to be connected to the greater cause, as it were, the connectedness that one has to feel in order to perform well at a company, communication assumes a far more vital role. 28% of leaders have said in that survey that poor communication was the primary cause of failing to deliver a project within its original time frame. I could, of course, go on giving you stat after stat about business communications and just how important they are and how important they're regarded by employees, but in so many instances, how little importance is actually placed on them by the companies themselves. And just like I've given you some shocking stats, there are some stats that actually tell us or give us an indication about what the future of internal communications ought to be, or at least what the optimal should be in the current scenario. And these will be among the things we'll be discussing on the podcast with Neha, Bijoy, and Chaitanya. Good communication is not just good for the employees, but it's good for business. As one paper in the Journal of Experimental Psychology went on to show, an empowered office environment can increase worker productivity on cognitive tasks by as much as 25%. We discussed this when I spoke to you last time about how music and the using of music in work settings could in fact increase employee productivity. 75% of the employees surveyed in that workforce survey are more likely to watch a video than read text. So it also gives you an indication of how internal communications as a paradigm is evolving over time. So audio and video are coming to the forefront. So gone really are the days when you could just put in an email and expect that the work of the internal communications team is done. As I've shown you through the help of so many surveys, that intranets are not particularly useful to a lot of people, emails are mostly not read, and emails are mostly considered a waste of time by a large majority of the workforce. So in this scenario, when communication is so important, virtual togetherness is so important, staying motivated with work and with your teams so important, but we're all staying apart. So what is the future of internal communications, and what is the present? More importantly, how are we to adapt to this situation? To help me understand this, we have representatives from Flipkart, Infosys, and BPCL. Three very different kinds of companies, but all having one thing in common. They're all using internal podcasting as a method of internal communications, and I'm here to find out whether or not it has worked for them, and if it has worked for them, how, and what they believe is the future of this particular medium. That is the point of this podcast. Something that you could take home yourself if you are an internal communications person in your company or in general in HR. The idea, of course, is use your voice to make your company listen better. And perhaps they will find their own voice, and with it, virtual togetherness is established even during these times of social distancing.
You are listening to SHRM Radio in partnership with Timber Media, Podcasters for India Inc.
Like I told you earlier, we have three very special guests with me who are talking all things internal communications in three very different companies, but among the best companies to work for in the country. We have Bijoy Venugopal from Flipkart, Neha Kothari from Infosys, and Chaitanya Gowande from BPCL. Let's start things off with Bijoy. First of all, thank you so much for joining us. Tell us how working at Flipkart, especially in terms of internal communications, has changed during the pandemic.
So the pandemic and, the ensuing lockdowns, we've had a number of them, have thrown new challenges before us. And our internal communications team has done a stellar job to keep our employees engaged. they've actually built this close-knit group and brought it even closer. There have been online meditation classes, yoga classes, dance classes, organic gardening, webinars, you name it. All of this online. And it's been very enriching 2 or 3 months, although we've all been stretched.
Stretched is putting it mildly, Bijoy. Let me throw the same question over to Neha. What were the changes that you had to immediately accustom yourself to when the pandemic hit, and what has kept it going? What has forged togetherness, so to speak, in these times of social distancing?
I think this pandemic has disrupted and rearranged our workplace, which none of us would have ever imagined. At Infosys, we enabled over 93% of our workforce to work from home, and all of this happened almost overnight. Although working from home is not new to us, but working from home for over 3 months now is something none of us ever imagined. Initially, it did take time for us to get used to this new normal, and it was also very critical to keep our employees informed, engaged, and motivated as there was so much disarray around us. We had to ensure our employees were safe. We had to ensure they are connected with their teams, with their managers, and most of all, their customers. And all of this had to happen virtually. Policies changed, systems were upgraded, cybersecurity was beefed up, and most importantly, constant communication was what kept us going. We did everything in our capacity to ensure there is no drop in productivity and that we mitigate any possible risk to our clients. Social distance cannot and did not stop us from collaborating and connecting with our teams globally. And I think this is what kept us motivated and will keep us motivated through these tough times.
Neha, let me step back a little bit from these current tough times and the importance that internal comms have assumed specifically during this time. But even before that, Infosys did something that no other company at that time had done. You started corporate radio and then moved on to internal podcasting. Can you tell me a little bit about the evolution, so to speak, of this radio podcasting journey of Infosys?
Infosys has always been a pioneer when it comes to adopting new technologies and tools. We were the first to embrace corporate radio many years ago, and with the digital disruptions around us, we quickly embraced the podcast model as we understand the pulse of our employees and exactly what they want. Bite-sized content is what was the need of the hour, and podcasts help us bring in both detailed and short modules on various topics. We believe in an agile form of communication, and podcasts are definitely the future. We host our podcast on our internal mobile app called Lex, and the response by far has been fantastic. We've got subject matter experts, our own leaders and employees share their views on industry trends, or how to be a great manager, or how to manage clients, or what's new in big data analytics, or how will AI change the game for us. Not just these, but we have segments that give insights on health and wellness, business around us, and intriguing employee stories. And all of this is packed in powerful modules of 5 to 7 minutes each, which is available on the go. The beauty is that this anytime, anywhere learning is our core value proposition, and podcasts have helped us in the journey. This journey is about reskilling our workforce, helping them learn, ensuring they get to know what's happening around them at any given point in time. The journey has been very interesting, and there is so much scope to grow and evolve. Infosians have always been open to interesting ways of consuming content, and podcasts have been a great success story for us.
Well, that's wonderful to hear, considering we are on a podcast ourselves. To know that podcasts are doing great things within Infosys is always heartening to hear. Let me throw the same question to Bijoy again at Flipkart, which has its own podcast called Studio 34, which used to be internal and now it is also available for external consumption. So Bijoy, tell us a little bit about the journey that Studio 34 at Flipkart has taken.
On our Studio 34 podcast, which is consumed by both internal and external audiences, we've been pretty much on the ball. So we've compiled a special pandemic playlist featuring some interesting episodes. So we've taken a 360-degree view of the ecosystem and surfaced voices from far and near. Mm-hmm. So we, for instance, we asked our employees to narrate what we call their quarantines, basically stories from quarantine. And they shared so many luminous insights and warm moments, which received some great feedback from our employees and from external stakeholders. Sharing stories, we've observed, goes a really long way in building a sense of oneness and community during a time like this.
That is so true. I was just earlier talking about how using voices could in fact foster a sense of community, which is so vital, especially at a time like this, which is also an interesting thing for a company like BPCL, which is of course a government-owned company with different kinds of workers and workforce spread across the country. A perspective from an organization like that is obviously super useful, which is why I'm super glad to have Chaitanya also here. Chaitanya, tell me a little bit about the journey of podcasting that BPCL has undertaken and what BPC Tarang, which is what the podcast is called, is all about, please.
BPC Tarang was an ongoing radio show which we started with Timber Media in 2016. It was intended as an employee infotainment activity in which there would be information as well as entertainment in the podcast as a means of engaging employees. Bharat Petroleum, because of the inherent nature of our business, we are spread out all over India. So most of the times, the only ways that we are connected, our employees are connected to each other, is through communication channels like this. We had started out in the initial few years with podcasts of our leaders speaking about new initiatives and new ways in which the company was moving forward. When I took over the channel assignment last year, my primary focus was to find out that why would I, as a listener, want to listen to BPC Tarang? Actually speaking, the unfortunate lockdown was a kind of a opportunity for us to use BPC Tarang to reach out to our employees because there were no other channels available in which we could directly speak to the employees. One of the things that we wanted to highlight was the fact that many of our employees were risking their lives and working in risky conditions to keep essential fuels available for the country. So for us, they were the true Corona warriors. So we started a series called the Corona Warriors series, wherein we used to interview a Corona warrior on every show and learn about his challenges, his journey, about how he overcame whatever difficulties or problems that arose during the lockdown. And that was a way of acknowledging the immense contribution that they were making to the organization. The main thing is now people have started looking forward to our shows, and I am also glad to say that there are people who are lining up to be interviewed and they want their team members to be interviewed for the show. Here, I must acknowledge the tremendous support of the Timber Media team, especially the RJs, who took out the time to learn about the different circumstances in which our organization works or our employees work. Because I also believe that unless you know the issues that we are speaking about, it remains only a shallow thing on a surface. I'm very happy to note that, and I'm very thankful to the RJs that they actually got into the subject and they were able to draw out powerful stories of the journeys of the Corona warriors. The fact that if they see a familiar face or they see a face of a particular leader or of a Corona warrior, they are tempted to click on it and to listen to it.
That is obviously so right. We are drawn to people whom we can recognize, and if there is a recognition and a certain kind of admiration that comes from our own peers, that is obviously useful in fostering a community at work. Circling back to Bijoy, what do you see as the future of internal communications, and will podcasts be a tool that is not just part of the zeitgeist, but is one that is going to continue into the future as well?
I think if the trends of the last 2 years are anything to go by, I think we are seeing podcasts emerge into their own. If our numbers are anything to go by, we're seeing quite the reverse. Our podcast has been getting a consistent number of plays, although we don't really put a lot of money behind. We are a very budget lean company when it comes to this. Budget lean as far as our external communications are concerned, but we've been seeing a lot of traction and interest in podcasts, and that's very encouraging. Of course, it's been a challenge trying to sell this idea internally, but now that we have the numbers, it definitely adds a big trust to our pitches.
Thanks, Bijoy. I'm going to throw the last word to you, Neha. What do you see as the future of internal communications within Infosys, and what are the lessons that you carry from this pandemic into the future?
This pandemic has taught us a number of things. One of them being the importance and relevance of the information provided by us as the internal comms team to our employees across the globe. At Infosys, we don't follow the one-size-fits-all approach, as we believe in tailoring our offerings as per the need of our employees spread across the globe. When you stop and think about this fast-paced, tech-led world and the way information is now consumed, you realize that gone are the days of omni-channel reporting. We need to accept that information and news is all around, but what will set you apart is the way in which you disseminate the news. How relevant, transparent, and trustworthy are you? Internal communications is the bridge that will help organizations understand the pulse of their employees and base their value propositions and major decisions on the ever-changing needs. From an Infosys point of view, I'd say we're ready for what lies ahead. And it's game on for us for sure.
Well, that's fantastic to hear. Customization is the need of the hour. Gone are the days, like Neha said, of omni-channel reporting. Customization could take on various different forms, but the one that was common to all of these three companies was internal podcasting. So that's the big idea of this episode of SHRM Radio. Use your voice, quite literally, to engage with your employees, to foster a sense of community, and it increases productivity. It's a win-win-win overall. Internal communication is obviously seen as an extremely important tool by employees across the world to feel that sense of belonging to the company, to that shared purpose that we all have when we're working in our different organizations. And one way you can do that is by making it more personal, giving it a sense of family, and certainly voices and celebrating the voices within the company is one sure shot way of doing it. So the bottom line is, if you do not have an internal podcast yet, what are you waiting for? Time's a ticking. Thank you so much for joining us. My thanks also to Neha, Bijoy and Chaitanya for giving their extremely valuable inputs, and to hopefully have coaxed you also into thinking of new ways to engage with your employees and make them all feel a little bit closer in these times of extraordinary social distancing. Until the next time, this is me, Rakesh Sharma, saying goodbye and promising that next time it'll be something new and something exciting.
This is SHRM Radio in partnership with Timber Media, Podcasters for India Inc.